I am thankful, ever thankful for their support and work. I would note that my colleague from Texas was just complaining allegedly, or about the alleged weakness of the Texas grid. Well, the only reason that there's any weakness to the grid is because we've had radical leftists embracing power schemes that have been funding our enemies in China and trying to promote a radical leftist agenda with unreliable energy. That's the truth. Promoting windmill power in Texas, which on a windless day, oddly enough, hard to predict this, I know, doesn't produce a whole lot of power. Or solar power, which on a cloudy day doesn't, I know, again, hard to predict, doesn't produce a whole lot of power. So I don't know, if you have a deep freeze in the state of Texas that shuts down the windmill capacity, and you have some other events going on, like some frozen gas lines, you end up having some difficulties. When you have had a war on reliable power, as my radical leftist colleagues have been doing for as long as I can remember, you end up with problems with the grid. And it's not just in Texas, it's nationwide. We've had rolling blackouts in California. Texas has been able to stave off those kinds of blackouts because we're trying to fight through the federal mandates and the laws that come out of this body and the regulations that come out of the federal government that prevent us from being able to provide the power we need for the people of Texas. Just last year, my colleague from Texas joined with my radical leftist colleagues on the other side of the aisle to advance the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which has done none of that, and which, by the way, is empowering China. And by the way, my colleague talked about enriching corporations. Well, guess what the Inflation Reduction Act does? By subsidizing massive companies. 90% of the subsidies go to billion-dollar corporations. That's the truth. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle like to pretend they're doing something green when what they're doing is enriching fat cats in big corporations, sending money to China to build solar panels rather than clean burning natural gas. We voted today to advance a bill so that we can have liquefied natural gas being exported out of Texas. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't want to do that. They want to make us weaker. They want to hurt our economy. They want to make Russia more powerful. They want to undermine Ukraine, even as they complain that we're not taking more borrowed money or more taxpayer money to give it to Ukraine to fund a war that doesn't have a mission. They want to undermine our ability to help Ukraine with liquefied natural gas. That's the truth. That's the actual facts of what's going on right now, because my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are trying to advance a radical notion of unicorn energy where we can have endless unreliable energy and then wonder why the grid might have a problem. Why aren't we building nuclear power? Why aren't we building more natural gas, which we have in abundance in this country? Why aren't we exporting more liquefied natural gas? Around the world, half the world doesn't have access to reliable energy. 3 billion people live in what we would call energy poverty. Why don't we export our energy so we can lift people out of poverty? The fact is, China has 1,100 coal-fired plants, probably more than that now. They're building 2 a week. They're producing the vast majority of the CO2 going to the atmosphere. Meanwhile, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to declare war on the internal combustion engine here in the United States. And if you got rid of every car in America and replaced it with an electric vehicle, you would impact CO2 by about, 2%, maybe, worldwide. If you got rid of every single car in America. Meanwhile, the average EV costs $16,000 more than an internal combustion engine automobile. The price of used cars is going up. We now have a mandate by this administration that the EVs are going to need to be 2/3 of the fleet by 2032, which means every American out there watching this, you are going to spend more for automobiles. If you live in the cold, your battery is going to take longer to charge. If you plug it in at your house, your electricity bill is going to double or triple because it uses as much electricity as your air conditioner. Yet my leftist colleagues think that's okay. And they've said so, sitting in the Rules Committee, they've said so here on the floor. That's just the price of fighting climate change, they say. Except it's not going to actually fight what they claim is what they want to stop. Because around the world, other countries are producing CO2 in mass quantities. We're producing CO2 at our 1990 levels because of innovation, because of clean burning natural gas. Yes, from Texas. I have no problem with that. But when my colleagues come down and say, oh, you're enriching corporations, they leave out that dirty little secret that we just passed $1 trillion bill that the American people will have to pay for to subsidize our enemies, to subsidize billion-dollar corporations, and undermine the very hardworking American family who wants to buy a car, the plumber who wants to have a truck, the family who wants to be able to have 2 vehicles to get around in, but they can't afford them anymore because we're regulating them out of existence. We're making it where you can't even afford it. And then we're adding all sorts of requirements, like kill switches. Can you believe this? Kill switches. If your eyes dart because you're allegedly under the influence of something, your car is going to shut down. All right, so what if it's wrong? What if it's 10 below zero? What if you're across a railroad track? You're going to have cars that just shut down, a kill switch. The government telling you you cannot get a car that doesn't have the expensive technology built into it to determine whether or not you might be under the influence. That's what we're doing to people. We're going to make that car twice as expensive, and we're going to make it to where they might be unable to move their vehicle. This is unconscionable what we're doing. I had a friend who went to go replace a windshield the other day. It was like $1,500 because it has some technology in it so you can see the speedometer in the glass and some other stuff. I mean, who cares? Good grief. What do I just want to have a windshield? It used to be like $200. We've made everything more expensive. We're making everything so regulated that you can't possibly afford it. You want to know why families are struggling? Because of that. My colleagues live in unicorn land. Like, there are no consequences to regulation. There's no consequences to writing checks that we can't afford, funding and subsidizing big corporations all the time to advance their radical agenda. They act like there's no consequences to open borders. The fact of the matter is we have a problem in this town, and it's not, as I think I saw the Capitol Hill reporter Jake Sherman report today, that somehow, Republicans are in disarray. It's been the least effective Congress in history. Well, let me just tell you something about the people I represent. They don't want this body to keep passing more laws and spending more money for the sake of it. They want us to actually stand up and fight for them. And standing up and fighting for them means doing something different. Because I promise you, that reporter and every other Capitol Hill reporter would judge success as continuing the status quo that has delivered us $34 trillion in debt, has delivered us stacks of laws that nobody can even count, literally. I looked up the Department of Justice to count all the criminal statutes. They tried to do a study in the 80s and they ran out and they just gave up because they couldn't find all the laws. Yet we keep passing more laws. Just today, we passed more programs. We passed more stuff on the floor. People are like, Chip, why are you always voting no? Because we're $34 trillion in debt and we have reams of regulations and reams of laws. What are those things doing to make the average American family's life better? That's the truth.